Welcome to So Different, So Appealing, the fourth of a series of exhibitions I have curated for Warehouse 421, entitled Substructures. The series of exhibitions looks at lively infrastructures and the role that they've played in the development of Gulf cities. So Different, So Appealing looks at the real estate industry as an engine for urban development within the Gulf, especially over the last quarter of a century. This role that real estate has played within urban development, that has kind of been perfected within Gulf cities, has become a very important paradigm for urban development globally, to the point where there is an effect known as the Dubai effect that is exported. This new paradigm of real estate repositions housing from being a dwelling or a human right to being primarily an economic or a financial vehicle, a way of driving development and a way of drawing in foreign investment. So the exhibition looks at the aesthetics and the rhetorics of the real estate industry and the ways in which the real estate industry markets and promotes itself. The artists in the exhibition use, on one hand, irony, humor, and parody, and on the other hand, appropriation as a way of kind of revealing or unpacking these aesthetics and rhetorics. This whole wall features one artwork by Abbas Akavan entitled Islands. It was originally presented at the Third Line Gallery in Dubai in 2010, and the original presentation of it consisted of a wall-filling mural painted in gold leaf onto drywall that recreated the then projected map of Dubai, which included a variety of real estate projects that were meant to augment and transform its coastline. What Abbas did then was the map was gridded, the mural was gridded into the way a traditional map would be, into 60 centimeter by 60 centimeter squares that were then sold as individual lots. And the way the value worked was that the most prime locations, the parts that are land, that are gold, and that were along the coast were the most valuable, and as more and more parcels sold, the price went up. This is the first attempt to try to reconstitute that project, because as the project developed and more parcels were sold, the original wall was broken down into pieces. So this is the first attempt to try to reconstitute that work, and it includes works from private collections that are framed. So this right here is, of course, the most iconic element, the Jumeirah palm. This over here, for people who are familiar with the city, they'll recognize that that is the Jebel Ali Free Zone. The panels up here that are unframed are actually parcels that didn't sell. And what's interesting about that is it demonstrates the way in which value is ascribed to land. So the portions of the map that constitute just water and hence no gold are not considered to be as collectible or as valuable. Akavan's use of gold is particularly poignant and quite canny. It really captures, in a very subtle and almost abstract sense, the exuberance that associated the early 2000s before the 2008 recession hit. And it also signifies the city of Dubai in an interesting way, because Dubai is so closely associated with the gold itself and jewelry, and which is the core business in one of the old hearts of the city. As the 2008 recession showed, almost every boom is haunted by the specter of an eventual bust. And that is most definitely true in the real estate industry. So while what we see are construction and these promises of future buildings and future structures, what we don't see is the demolition that often precedes it, where an existing structure that has run into disrepair is pulled down to make room for a new building or a new structure. So the role of the demolition industry within Gulf cities is something that is not very well known, but it is a very important part of the real estate industry and the way in which these mega projects get built. And what the expansion of the real estate industry over the last 25 years has done is it's significantly reorganized urban dynamics within Gulf cities. So the old hearts have been emptied out in some sense and turned into spaces for heritage, and instead new hearts have been established elsewhere. So a couple of the works in the exhibition look at this moment of demolition that precedes the kind of exuberance or productive phase of construction. This particular body of work is by Vikram Devecha, and they're called demolition monoprints. And these three works were produced in Sharjah. And what the artist does is he's been in conversation with members in the demolition industry for many years now, and he will gain access to a building that is scheduled to be demolished, an older structure from the 60s, 70s, 80s that has fallen into disrepair. And he will go on site, he will ink some part of the existing architecture and then basically make a unique print off of it, lay paper flat on top of it, and then put a lot of pressure into it until basically an imprint of what's on the wall comes off onto the paper. So this set of three works were produced at a building in Sharjah, in the old heart of the city, on Bank Street, although it wasn't one of the famous Bank Street buildings. And what's interesting about these bodies of work is that they kind of give you some sense of the interior architecture. So the work on the left is a tiled wall, and so it probably belongs to either the kitchen or more likely the bathroom. The one in the middle actually captures an imprint of an arch somewhere in the middle of an apartment. And then the one on the right shows a fragment of a wall that's been half demolished. This is another set of work from the same series. These were imprints made off of a column that remained after the demolition of the Mina Plaza Tower complex that was actually located very, very close to where we are at Warehouse 421. The Mina Plaza is a really interesting building in relationship to the real estate industry. It was a building it was a project that was started in the late 2000s, and possibly because of the recession, or maybe because of corruption, or some other reason, it was never completed. But it was a really large complex, and for the longest time, it actually hovered over the neighborhood that we're in, Mina Zayed, and kind of ended up being both an inadvertent landmark for the neighborhood, but also this kind of ghost that was a reminder of the early 2000s exuberance, and then also a reminder of the recession and the way the recession really brought that cycle of accelerated development to a close, at least temporarily. So this set of monoprints actually commemorates the moment after demolition, as compared to the ones that Devecha made in Sharjah, which commemorate a moment before demolition. This work is another examination of demolition within the UAE context. It is by Nasser Al-Zayani, and it's titled, "Oh, There Goes Gravity." Again, the subject is the Mina Plaza and its demolition. Al-Zayani was really fascinated by the demolition. The demolition became a major media event. It was promoted and covered in a lot of the local newspapers. The demolition itself was attended by a lot of people. It was entered into the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest demolition of its sort. So Al-Zayani was really intrigued by this event and wanted to gain access to either the demolition as it was happening or the site of the demolition after the fact, but he wasn't really successful. So what he did instead was act as a sort of urban archaeologist, and he did a survey of the areas surrounding the site of the demolition of the Mina Plaza. And right around the Mina Plaza are some of these old souks in Abu Dhabi. And he was drawn to the plant souk. And in the plant souk, he found a series of objects that had fallen over and broken because of the force of the demolition. These clay pots that are sold to house plants. Ceramic sherds are a very common part of what archaeologists find when they first start digging. So he collected these fragments and then he put them back together to constitute the original objects. He used blue painter's tape as a way of making the joints explicit. And his display simultaneously cites the demolition site and a museum display. So it's set up in the way you would encounter archaeological objects in a universal museum, like say the Louvre, Abu Dhabi. But the display itself is made up of cement cinder blocks, which are kind of one of the core ingredients of construction. And the pots themselves are displayed on these armatures that he had made that are made out of rebar, which is again an important raw material in the construction industry. This hybrid display that simultaneously indexes the construction site and the museum display, and that also recalls this moment of demolition within this cycle of construction and demolition that is the real estate industry, also highlights the way that the role that demolition plays within the construction of cultural institutions as well. Especially across the Gulf, a lot of the really large-scale real estate developments that have been planned and executed over the last 25 years have been anchored by an important cultural institution, and Al-Zayani's installation kind of hints at that. Titled Boom, Bust, Bubble, Boogie Woogie, this work is a collaborative work by Christopher Joshua Benton, Ashe Bhave, and Rakan Gracie. And it basically produces a fake real estate ad. These sorts of images are super familiar to anyone who lives in a Gulf city. You encounter them regularly on the side of the highway, on top of hoardings that are obscuring construction sites, in magazines, and in various other ways as well. What the artists do is they use a lot of the same raw materials that are used to construct those advertising images to produce an image that parodies it. They've used stock photography, they've used language that's commonly used in real estate advertising materials, and they've used a digital render. All three are often key components of these sorts of billboards and advertisements. What the artists have done is that they have pushed the rhetoric to the absurd. The inspiration point for the brand new building that the advertisement announces is a very common and popular local street food, the shawarma. So the central tower whose construction is being announced is based on the kind of characteristic conical rotisserie of the shawarma. And they've trumped that up, so there's a digital render that represents that. Its scaly surface, web-like surface, kind of looks like very futuristic architecture, but it also recalls the kind of crusty surfaces of the shawarma rotisserie. Other ways in which they have parodied the language of real estate, the building is titled Burj Cafeteria, and of course Burj is the Arabic word for building, but they've taken cafeteria and split it into two. They've elevated it or made it a little exotic sounding by adding diacritical marks that are common to French and German. And but the word cafeteria also is another reference back to the shawarma. The cafeterias are these kind of very unassuming sort of establishments that a lot of people eat at in Gulf cities. They're where people often go to get their shawarmas. In addition to highlighting the absurdity of the real estate marketing language, another thing that this work does very cleverly is it demonstrates the way in which the real estate industry mines the local. So in this particular case, the shawarma is used as a way of indexing the local, but the advertising image is universalized in a way to appeal to everybody around the world. So in some sense, it's selling a product or an image that declares itself as being off here, but something that is palatable, pun intended, to potential investors around the globe.